Okay, so let's talk about in depth some of the offsite SEO factors we want to look at. Back to our friend the infographic. So there are lots of ways to get offsite notice. And Google, back in the day when they first were founded, the way they became Google and they handed everybody else their lunch was Google said, all things being equal, in a massive data set, the deciding factor on quality of a site is going to be the number and relevancy of the links to that site from other relevant sites. That's how Google became Google. Larry Page and Sergey Brin came up with this idea, they implemented it, and all of a sudden they started returning much better, much more relevant results to the public than Yahoo or Alta Vista were doing. And Yahoo at the time had some automatic work, but it was mostly a direct human-run directory, and it just didn't scale up. And Alta Vista was, at the time, it was a major player, but it was just based on on-page content. It never looked at links. And Google came along and swept them into the dustbin of history. And it's all with the links. So, different places to get links, and we're going to hit most of these, but the idea with the link is when you go out to capture a link, you want to go out and say, here's a piece of good relevant content that might be of interest to your readers. Take a look at it, and if you want, we'd appreciate a link back to the site, but never say, here's a specific link to a specific page. Use this text. That's going to get you in trouble now. Just say, here's something that's interesting to your users. If you want to link back to the site, we'd appreciate it, but never say, I want this link pointing to this page. That's going to tell Google that you're trying to develop unnatural links, which Google wants you to develop links over time, but they don't want you to develop unnatural links. They want them to grow and appear like flowers in a field after a rainstorm. But if you approach it that way and just let them happen naturally, your competitors who are going out and trying to get links are going to rank better than you. So how do you get these links? Lots of different ways to drive them to your site, but key thing here is to have quality content that people want to link to. Something that's interesting, intriguing, has value, and it just isn't marketing speak. Share that out. Tweet it. Put it on Facebook. Put it on Google+. Put it on Snapchat, Pinterest. Any of these social media sites. Get your content out there. That's pretty straight ahead, and we'll talk some more about that in a second, but there are other easier ways to get links as well. If there's a directory that has a list of relevant companies in your industry, get a profile on it. Very simple, very relevant. If you're in conversation on an industry site, throw a link in there. Sometimes it'll be visible, sometimes it won't. But having that link there at least will get some attention. Go out and author articles on other people's websites. You can have a link back to your site, and Google may not give you initial credit for that. They may say, well, this could be them just trying to get noticed. But if you're going out there and you're saying, I'm an expert, here's my article, here's my content, and here's a link back to my site, Google may ignore that initial link, but then you read this article and you click on it and you maybe share that link with a friend in a blog post or an email, and all of a sudden that one link from your article starts to pick up value, and that value will be noticed by Google over time, even if Google's saying, well, suspicious link because he's a guest blogger here. So guest blogging, if you have a chance to post an article on somebody else's site as a guest blogger, go ahead and do it, but make sure the article is unique and not something that's already on your site. and make sure it has value. And then Google's going to look at it much more favorably than just regurgitating something off your site. Directory listings, that goes back to profile listings. Resource list. So one of our clients sold business intelligence software, and one of the links we got was a resource list on a university website of different business intelligence software packages. And so we included our company, and we actually included a couple more, just because it gave value to the professor and gave him something to do, and it didn't appear to be completely self-serving on the marketing front. Although we were very upfront about that we were working for company X. And we handed this to him, he put it up, and we got links from a university website in the marketing department from a relevant section of the university website, and it was wonderful. Anytime you can get a link from a university or any kind of .edu website, Google gives that more power because they're harder to get. And they tend to be a little more qualified, a little more kind of scrutinized before they're published. If you can get a link from a .gov site, Google loves those as well. But they're even harder to get unless you're in bed with the right people. But Google likes links from .govs, .edus, and they give them a little more power than a similar link from a .com site or a .org site. Sponsored links. Somebody comes up to you and says, I can get you 1,000 links for $9.95, or I can get you links on 7 relevant directories that will increase your page rank on Google, and it'll cost you $50 a month. Say thanks, but no thanks. Google knows about this stuff, and Google doesn't like this stuff. Google will penalize you for this, okay? And it could be somebody saying, I'm going to create articles for you and publish them on 30 different directories. And whoa, yeah, that sounds great. Directory is generally a good idea, but you start to look at this, and the 30 directories are in India and China and the Far East and areas where you're not doing business. And Google's going to start to look at this, and they're going to throw something called a manual penalty on you. When Google throws a manual penalty on you, they will warn you in Webmaster Tools saying, you have violated our terms of service, and here are some examples, and we're going to remove you partially or completely from the Google database. It's Thor's hammer slamming you on the forehead. And it's when Hulk lifts Thor's hammer. It's awful. We were working with a client. We had done some on-site optimization, but they had had a previous SEO firm who had worked up until about 4 months before. And I'm getting ready to take a couple weeks off for Christmas. And we get this notice from Google, and Christmas kind of disappears for me. It's the company who was pretty much a righteous player lost 90% of their traffic. And they were making money off this web traffic. It wasn't their only source of revenue, but they were making money. They lost 90% of the traffic in the space of 2 days. Now, how do you deal with something like this? Okay. So, manual penalties, how do you deal with one? And this is a little outside the scope of the presentation, but it's still a good thing to speak about. So the first thing you do is you look at what Google's telling you. And they'll generally say, here's a list of links that are suspicious, or here's the pages on your website that you've keyword stuffed, or whatever. So look at that first, and then start doing additional research. If it's with links, we're going to talk about some of the tools you can use, but start to find these other suspicious links that are targeting your website. So our client they had been sold a bill of goods for some of their offices where they had all these really low-quality articles spammed across the internet, and not one of them in the U.S. So it was Russia and China and Japan and Vietnam and Australia and a lot of the former Soviet republics, as well as Eastern Europe. And so there were articles about how wonderful this company was at doing their particular service in Lower Slovavia, in a language nobody spoke in Lower Slovavia. And Google thought this was suspicious. Surprise, surprise. And so they penalized us. So we went out and we identified all these really poor quality links, and we'll talk about how we did that in a few minutes. And we took them and we took a list and we said, okay, Google, here's a list of links we do not want associated with our site anymore. They may still be out there, but we don't want them associated. We want to disavow them. And we uploaded this to Google. Now, when you do this, Google wants to first know that you tried to reach out to these people in human form. So you need to actually make some efforts to reach the bad sites and talk and have them take them down. And so you need to send emails and document that and supply that along with the disavow list. And once you've done that, Google will review it and say, okay, you've fixed it or you haven't. One thing with the disavow list, it's the nuclear option. When you remove a link from Google's database, even if it's a good link and you shouldn't have removed it, it's gone. You'll never get credit for that again. It is the nuclear option. It is crossing the Rubicon. Use whatever metaphor you want. Once you remove those links, they're gone. And if you're removing good links, it can hurt you more than help you. So when something like this happens with a manual penalty, get a professional in there. And at least have them review your work before you submit it to Google. Sometimes the professional can go in and do it much quicker than you. We were able to do it in about 3 weeks. And we were up and running again by the second week of January. But that was 3 weeks of 12-hour days, 6 days a week, which made the wife and the kids really happy. Now, sometimes you can get hurt by things that you shouldn't be penalized for. And communicating with Google via the Webmaster tools will allow you to address it. So this same site, one of their target segments were Spanish-speaking blue-collar workers in South Florida. And so they were running an ad on a local Spanish website, and it was placed all over hell and gone on the site. Like 13,000 instances of this little text ad. And it was actually identified as an ad right above it. And so when something is an ad, Google generally will ignore it because ads are part and parcel of the internet, and Google doesn't mind them. They just won't give you credit. But Google didn't notice that it was an ad. They thought it was just a malicious link that we had put up 1,300 times in the space of a week and a half. And so that triggered their automatic warnings. And so we went in and we talked to them and we said, okay, for this website, we do not want to disavow it, but it's an ad. And here's a screenshot of it saying paid advertisement and our link right below it. And then we took 30 screenshots of 30 different pages on the site and supplied that up to Google. Now, the way we supplied that up was via Webmaster tools and via a Gmail account, and putting it up on a Google Drive so Google could access it, and then sharing it with Google. So a fairly kind of detail-oriented, pain-in-the-tuchus process I hope you never have to go through. But if you see your traffic tank, first place you want to look is Google Webmaster Tools, and go back to the algorithm updates. And this kind of circling back, anytime somebody offers you something that sounds too good to be true, it is, okay? when we do a link building campaign, we say, we will increase the number of relevant links to your website over 6 months. And it's going to be a steady state unless we have some kind of really high value news item. If you can get some kind of high value news event, Google doesn't mind big spikes in links, but they want to see some reason for it other than just kind of appearing out of the woodwork. So if you have a new product release, you get picked up on the front page of SlideShare. Google loves that kind of stuff. So SlideShare is another good place to put links. If you have some really interesting content, put it up on SlideShare. Put it up on your LinkedIn account. Get it out there. Okay, so how do we approach an account to get a link? Google looks at the links to your website in 3 different ways. There's the authority of a link, i.e., and that's tightly tied with relevancy. So is another website talking about your site that is referenced by a lot of third and fourth websites? So if there's a hub website out here that Google believes is kind of an authority site in your subject area, and you get a link from that authority site to your site, Google likes that. Now that link has a couple of factors. It has a trust factor. Does Google trust this site? And then it has and trust is related to relevancy. And then it also has kind of a volume power factor, also called authority. So a site that has a lot of traffic to it and a big following will have a high authority, and if that is a relevant site and a lot of other relevant sites linked to it, will have a high trust factor. And we'll take a look at this on a couple different fronts here in a second. But ideally, when you're trying to identify a site to get a link from, find one that is relevant to your site and try to look for the thought leaders in your space. That's going to help you out. Every time you ask for a link, remember, it's currency. It has value. It may take a guy 5 minutes, it may take a guy half an hour to put that link up, but that value has to be exchanged for something of value from you, and that's where your good content's going to come in. You approach the site you're asking the link for as giving them a business opportunity that's going to help their users. Okay? Never say, I want to trade. Just say, here's something I think might be of interest to your user. Now, if you have a relationship with them, it's going to be much easier. But if you're cold calling them, you really need to give them a compelling reason why they should pay attention to you and why you should get a link. And remember, if it's free or easy, you're going to get what you pay for. Okay, so places to look for information on quality sites. Couple of different ones out there. The first one is Webmaster Tools. It'll show you the current sample of the current links to your website. It won't show you all of them, but it will show you some of the ones Google thinks are quality. And excellent place to start. And then there are other places where you can look both at your website and your competitor's website. Majestic SEO, Link Research Tools, Moz.com or Moz.org. It used to be called SEO Moz. Ahrefs, and there's a little tool called Xenu Link Sleuth that will help you identify broken links within your site. But Majestic, Moz, and Link Research Tools are great places to go out there and say, here are my competitors' websites. Here are the links they have. Here's the anchor text of the links. Here's the age of the links. Here's a trust factor. Here's an authority factor for each one of these links. And so you can kind of look and say, okay, here are the top 5 competitors. Here are the links they share in common that I don't have. Or here are some opportunities, and you can also look for neighborhoods. The different tools will give you lots of different ways to dig in. Majestic and Moz are probably the most affordable. Link research tools gives you a really strong data set, and it's especially good at the forensic dealing with the penalty sort of problems, but it's bleeding expensive. You definitely get what you pay for, but it's pricey. Ahrefs is good. We don't use it that often just because we're kind of majestic, modest people, but Ahrefs is good. This is really good to look at your competitors' websites. You throw in a list of their pages, and Xeno will go through and look for broken links from other websites, and you can go to these other websites and say, hey, I noticed you had a link to site X that's not working anymore. Here's a link to our website that you can put up there instead, and it's still good, relevant stuff that will help your users. Easy, low-hanging fruit that. Let's take a look at some of these. So make it easy for people to link to your sites. Those little social sharing buttons, post this on Facebook, Twitter, Reddit, whatever, those are gold. They make it very easy for people to share your links with other people out there. And those kind of 1,000 grains of sand make a beach approach, where just making it easy for other people to share is excellent. As you're working with new partners and signing contracts and agreements, include a language saying we need a link from your site to our site. Just Coca-Cola went crazy with this. Every time they renewed an agreement with a bottling plant, they had links from the bottling plant's website to the main Coke website. And it was kind of a one-time thing. Once they got the value, it wasn't something they could go back and do again. But for about 3 years, they were adding quality links hand over fist. And it was just because every time they renewed an agreement, a link was added. As you're creating content to share, create it with kind of good SEO underlying structure to it, keyword-rich, relevant topics to your website, and share it all over hell and gone. Okay, press releases, promotional materials, broadcast, print, anywhere you can put a link, go ahead and put it there. Some of them may not count initially, but you can pick up secondary and tertiary value from them. My example with the guest blogger, where that initial link Google ignored because they thought it was maybe something you had gone out after, but people sharing, the pass-along factor really can help. So now, as you're going out and hunting down these links, you want to be a little careful that you don't get into the wrong neighborhood. And so if you're living on the Upper West Side of Manhattan and you go down to Alphabet City and you have somebody come up from Alphabet City, it's not the right person. You want to get the right neighborhood of links. You want to have relevance. You also want to make sure there aren't a lot of bad players in the area you're looking at. Even if the link looks good, it might be on a server or in a neighborhood of servers that could be questionable. So a couple ways to avoid this happening. Look at the IP address for the link. And on your IP address, you have 4 blocks of three numbers each. So you have your A block, B block, C block, and D block. You want to avoid getting a lot of links from any one C block over a short time. And a C block would be, in this case, 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 2 would be a different C block. But these generally refer to sites that are hosted by the same hosting company. And some hosting companies are good, and some aren't. And some kind of maintain some discipline with the companies they let on, and some just will take anybody's dollar. So try to spread out your number of C blocks. Okay, so Majestic, Moz, link research tools, they all give you the full IP address of the link. So just vary up that C block number. And also, Majestic, Moz, and LRT will give you domain authority as well as page authority. So you can look at individual pages or you can look at entire domains. Look at the domain first. If you can get a link from a good, high quality domain, the individual page is going to be less important. So look at the domain authority. And again, you're looking for domain trust and domain authority. Link research tools will help you look for really bad actors, bad links out there, but it gets pricey. So cost-benefit analysis there. How do you tell if there are bad players among the links you're targeting? Well, Link Research Tools has something called the Link Detox tool. It's incredibly helpful if you're in the land of manual penalty, trying to figure out who's linking to you poorly. But if you're looking at another site or a family of sites and you're trying to identify the best links to go after with your limited time, the Link Detox tool can kind of help you go through and figure out which ones are good, which ones are bad. It ain't cheap, but it's worth it. So here's an example. For this site, and this is Expedia, overall, it has on a scale of 1 to 1,000, has a 313 risk number, with 1,000 being awful, and anything under about 400 being all right. Link Detox tool will allow you to look at individual links and individual domains and give them a detox score, and then it'll give you reasons why. And the reasons could be, and these are some, even if you don't use link research tools, look at the reasons they give you in their help section for bad links. A domain that doesn't appear in Google, a young domain, a domain with content that's not in the home country's native language. So if I have a domain in Russia that's in English, that sends up a flag. It's not a guarantee, but Link Research Tools looks at about 30 different factors to come up with this domain risk. And it will actually give you a breakdown. You can export it. And then you can actually go through on an individual link-by-link basis and see what the page looks like and its individual score. That's particularly helpful if you're trying to do some diagnostics. The great thing about that tool is you can look at these sites and they are launched in a protected window. So if they're hosting malware or something, it's not going to infect your machine. So Link Research Tools. Now, Link Research Tools calls authority and trust, they have their own words. They call authority power, and they call trust, and then they have a multiple here. So the power trust. Moz has something similar where it combines power and authority. It will give you an idea on kind of who to go after. Link Research Tools has some excellent white papers on people who got in trouble and how they were fixed, as well as link building. So excellent content there. And speaking of white papers, that little story I told you about how the Grinch ruined Christmas for me and the Beasley team, we actually spell it out in a couple of blog posts that are kind of a good set of steps to take if you ever get in this problem. But the biggest thing is hire up a professional. It'll go much quicker and you'll lose much less traffic over time. All right, so how are we doing on time? Okay. So how do we go about identifying these targets. We've kind of talked around this a little bit, but look at your top competitors for the search terms you want to rank for. And generally, you want to go for the top 5 to 10 results on any one term. Generally, the first page of results, and depending on how Google's displaying results, it might be 5, it might be 7, it might be 10. But look at the top competitors. And then run each one of those competitors through your link tool, whether it's Majestic or LRT or Moz, and get a inbound link profile for them. And I'll have a whole list of the links. Now, with some of the tools, you can actually have them do this for you, but if not, you can compare these lists of links using the wonders of Excel and look for opportunities where there are common links to these top sites and you're not included. You don't have a link from there. And then start to say, okay, I have this list of opportunities. Let's go ahead and look for the ones I want to target first. Number one, look for things you recognize. You know your market well. Look for market leaders. Look for thought leaders in your market. And if you have a whole list of sites you don't recognize, look at the authority, look at the trust, and start to draw them out. Now, the authority and the trust are Moz's or Majestic or LRT's best interpretation of how Google's looking at the results. If you see an incredibly relevant link opportunity from a site that may not have a great authority or trust score, as long as it's positive, and you think that's an incredibly relevant link, and even if Google doesn't count it, the traffic from that website to your website is going to be quality traffic you want, go ahead and reach out for them, okay? You can let the tail wag the dog here with this obsessive focus on trust and authority, but if you also see an opportunity that may not have the highest score here, go ahead and don't be afraid to reach out. Just make sure it's a good, relevant site that's not in a bad spot. Also, start to look on your social media tools and try to identify who's out there talking about your space. And we'll talk about that more a little bit with social media, but try to find the thought leaders, the influencers. Look at your top blogs that come up in different blog engines like Technorati, Feedster, Blogster, Search Engine Blog. You can do a blog-specific search within Google.com. Look for the top people who are talking about your product, your services, your goods. Once you've identified the list of links, bucket them out by different messages. What is going to be the most effective message you can take to these different groups of sites to get them to link for you? So one set of sites may have one message and one piece of marketing collateral. Another set of sites may have a different white paper, a different set of messages. But bucket them out. Try to not cookie cutter approach the whole lot. And then try to find a live person and a telephone number and cold call them. And just say, and this is going to not be your most successful strategy, but you have if you can get a live person on the phone, it gives you a better chance of success than a cold email. But if you can't find a live person, try to find a real person's email address. And if you can't find their email address, try to find a editor at or a email address, okay? But the more personal you can get with this outbound link building, the more successful you're going to be. It's a lot like a PR campaign. You identify your list of media, you identify the editors, you make a pitch based on the different categories, and you reach out to them. Don't be afraid to support it with press releases, email blasts, etc., so your customers will also know about it as you're doing this outreach. Okay, let's hop into social media, and that's going to kind of wrap it up. Social media and SEO. Google pays attention to social media interactions on the web. Recently, Google started taking Twitter feeds and putting it into the search results directly. So if somebody tweets something, it's automatically within the Google search, the Google database. This is going to make Twitter have a much greater impact potentially on your organic ranking. But Twitter, by its very nature, is fairly transient, kind of the subject du jour, and it changes really quickly. So it's good and get you noticed, but it's not going to be as permanent as getting a link and a conversation on LinkedIn or Facebook, or maybe getting an image put up on Pinterest. Not quite as long-lasting, but social media, very influential on search results. Start doing keyword research within your social media monitoring tool. And that could be anything from just doing Google searches for social media specific channels to having something like a Hootsuite or Ravens tools or a Radiant 6 or a NetBase, lots of different social media tools out there. Hootsuite's probably the most accessible one for most of us in here. It's affordable. It has a decent feature set at a good price, and it's pretty easy to use. Radiant 6 is part of Salesforce now, and the Salesforce Marketing Cloud. I like Radiant 6. It has a lot of team management features that are tied into the social activities, but it's part of Salesforce, so it's not the cheapest thing on the planet. NetBase is crackerjacket doing natural language analysis. And all of these look at different things, but they can help you to identify the conversations and the influencers. And so let's talk about kind of how we can look at the different segments of a social media universe. Charlene Lee from Forrester Research came up with this paradigm, and she left and she went to Altimeter, but the paradigm still is out there. And she split up the social media universe into a couple different ladders. The creators, conversationalists, critics, collectors, joiners, spectators, and inactives. People can have more than one social media presence. And if you add up the numbers here, you'll see it goes over 100 pretty fast. Your critics are going to be the ones you want to, or your creators are going to be kind of your primary target. They're the ones starting conversations. They're the ones that are most often have a large following, and they create new content. They're not just replying to other people's content. They're actually creating brand new elements. It could be a blogger. It could be analysis, but it's brand new created content in your space. Your conversationalist will talk and share and sometimes endorse the content created by the creators. Your critics look at the content that's out there, the conversations, and they add critical thinking and critical analysis to it. Beyond just the endorsement, they actually say, I like this, but I don't agree with it because. Critical analysis, not critics in the bad way, but critical analysis. Your collectors, they tend to monitor and kind of collect and gather, and they don't necessarily do too much outbound participation, but they can be a decent market to target over time. Your joiners join, pay attention sometimes, occasionally engage, but not as active. Spectators, they watch, they don't do much of anything, but they're also your mass market. If you can get in front of them, it's going to be your biggest chunk of people. But if you go with the Jeffrey Moore paradigm of early adopters and then kind of mass market and crossing the chasm, the joiners are on the other side, or the spectators are on the other side of the chasm. And just one note, these numbers are for the US. They're a little different in Europe. They're a little different in Asia Pacific. So this kind of recaps what I just said. Inactives are exactly what they are. They don't do much. Once you've identified your critics, your creators, your collectors, and to a lesser extent your spectators, you want to identify the ones who are talking the most, have the most conversations. They tend to have the biggest followers, whether they're a creator or a critic, and they have the most influence. And then you also want to look at how they're speaking. Are they generally positive, negative, or neutral? So it's not just the keywords in the language, but it's the tone of the conversation. As you're approaching these with the critics and the creators, you want to give them straight facts, give them a little ego stroking, but don't go too crazy. They generally like to be the center of attention, but they also, by being the center of attention, start to develop a pretty sensitive nose for people blowing smoke. They enjoy solving problems for others. Now, as you're approaching these people, the social links they create can be one of two kinds. There can be the primary link, which Google will give you credit for and gets shared around, or they can be a secondary link, and this is where they'll link to your site and then somebody will retweet it, they'll share it, they'll like it. Oftentimes the secondary links will get you more value over time because it implies there's been some social validation. Google's saying a lot of people have liked this, shared this, plussed it, so that's a signal that this is probably a good link and there's some relevance to this site. As with the links just from regular websites, look at also the domain authority and look at the author. How much influence does the author have? Their reach, their volume. Hootsuite, again, is going to help you out with that. Okay, just to wrap it up, internal linking, you want to follow the same rules we talked about earlier. Keyword-rich links that share value from one page to the next. So every time you get a link to your website, that link has value. And sometimes it's called value, sometimes it's called link juice. But that value comes into your website, and then it gets dispersed to all the internal links on your website to other pages. So if it comes to your home page and there are 30 links, that value from that link gets split into 30 parts and gets shared across your website. So this kind of sharing of link value, of link juice, is crucial to understanding how to set up your internal link structure. Don't go crazy creating a lot of internal links. And as you create these internal links, say, what are my most important pages on the site and where do I want to focus my energy? Where do I want to send the most link value to? And and have links to those and maybe not to other parts of your site. Avoid the generic words. Okay, so couple things on hosting questions. If you can host your site on your own servers and you have both the financial and the technical expertise to do it, it's generally a pretty good idea unless you're running a major e-commerce site. You have much more control at a very granular level on how things are set up. Downside is it does take a lot of technical expertise, and you are ultimately responsible for keeping your servers secure and not having them hacked into. If you can't host it on your own site, you can go with shared hosting, and you can either go completely shared with a virtual host where a lot of people are sharing one IP address, or you can go for a virtual private host where you have a single IP address for a single domain. Having a virtual private host, virtual private server is going to be a little bit better in that you have more control over who you're sharing the domain with. You don't have to worry about bad actors being on a shared domain with you. It costs more, and you have more technical responsibility to keep that server up and running. Shared hosting, much cheaper. If you go with a reputable hosting company like Averio, or even to a lesser extent GoDaddy, they do a pretty good job of policing the domains. Some of the other shared hosting companies out there don't, and they'll let anybody and their brother on. Amazon Web Services, good reputable company, not particularly good at the self-policing of bad actors on the domain. The faster your page loads, the more Google likes it. If you can get it to load to load in more than 15 seconds, Google does not like it. They like it to load in 2 or 3 seconds. Google also looks at the number of pages visited on your site by any deep user or any individual user. So one user can, if they visit 4 or 5 pages, Google considers that a sign of a quality site that is delivering what's promised in the link. Google also likes sites that have repeat visitors, and they like sites that don't have a high bounce rate. So even if somebody goes to your site and doesn't bounce back to Google, if they don't go to any other pages on the site, Google considers that a bounce or an exit, and they're going to lower your ranking for that. For your domain, the older your domain is, the better as a rule. But if your domain's gotten in Google's bad graces in the past, sometimes you can never get out of that. Sometimes you're stuck and you just need to create a brand new domain. If you have a keyword in your domain name, that's good, but don't go crazy with that. .com is still the kind of major top-level domain name. If you can get a .edu or .gov, that's great. Some of these other top-level domains like .tv and .lb and .x aren't really worth the time unless you're running a questionable business. You can oftentimes buy expired domains, but be very careful about that and do some really serious domain profiling through link research tools before you shell out the money for it. Now, earlier we said Google loves the content that's evergreen and has been around for a while and has demonstrated quality. Google also likes fresh content, brand new content. And they also like brand new content that reflects brand new queries. So if there's a news item that all of a sudden gets lots of queries, it can shift the rankings. That's query freshness. So sometimes you can take advantage of this in Newsjack and get a page up quickly that matches kind of hot breaking news, or maybe promote it and get links to an existing page. And if you have the time, it's a good way to increase your ranking, but it does take some resources and kind of constant attention. We talked about information architecture. Keep it consistent. We talked about organizing the site. We talked about keyword-rich names, but we didn't really hammer on the consistent approach to it. Have your topic buckets and your site and your directory split up in roughly the same amount of content and the same depth of content. So don't have a very thin, light directory here for one topic and then a very deep, multi-page, multi-subdirectory area for another topic. You want to be consistent across your entire domain and make the buckets fairly equal where possible. So just to kind of wrap up, we talked about offsite factors quite a bit in the last few hours. That's where we really want to go. That's your extra mile is going to be your ability to get noticed by these relevant sites, whether it's via social media or just sharing your traditional content out there. Sharing it out with the right sites by doing the research around relevance, authority, and how the other sites are ranking is key here. If you're in a competitive area, odds are your competitors are already doing this. We've worked with home loan companies, like a Quicken Loans, but not Quicken Loans. And that is a dog-eat-dog, incredibly competitive area. And the way we were able to be successful is by going out and doing consistent, targeted link building around a very focused set of keyword phrases. And we actually drilled it down all the way to the neighborhood level. So trying to get a home loan in Moraga or trying to get a home loan in Menlo Park. And we just really, really worked it down to the very, very targeted link outreach. So that reaching for the extra mile is going to allow you to beat people. And it's also going to allow you to really understand things when something goes south, whether it's a manual penalty or Google changes the algorithm. If you have a good understanding of the bones of your website, your overall link structure, and how social media people are talking about you, then when something goes south, it's going to take that much less time to correct it, whether it's an algorithm change or a penalty.